All right, so our class today will be on true and quasi-experimental studies. Okay, I know that, so I have a quick look on what you guys have, answered with the link I shared yesterday. And I see a lot of you guys are doing mixed methods, okay? And actually the minimal one was quantitative, and qualitative also has a lot of people are doing qualitative studies, so that's fine, that's all right. With mixed methods, it's going to be a mixture of both. So as long as you guys know exactly what you're looking for and how to measure the data, how to analyze the data, that would be fine. Okay. So today's class is, we're going to go a little bit on experimental. Okay. So those who are doing quantitative and mixed method, I would say, would find this a little bit more useful, but not to say that qualitative people won't have any benefit from this, because the approach that you look into research, okay, it's similar to all, right? So just a quick aim for today, what you guys should be able to do is to compare and distinguish between true and quasi-experimental designs, right? So because when people say experimental, it doesn't always mean experiments. Okay? It's not. So it includes a lot of things actually. So because a lot of the confusion nowadays, I can see that when I ask people what sort of research we're doing, they will say qualitative, and some would say quantitative. And when I ask why, the only reason was those who are doing quantitative was doing experiments, and those who are qualitative, they don't do experiments. So that's not correct actually. It really depends on the data and the approach, the methodology that you use. Okay, so we'll see afterwards like what this entails, and I hope you guys can distinguish these two, okay, and manipulate your experiments according to the various methods that are available. Okay. And lastly, you can select between the different designs for application in your own study. Okay, so very quick on that. And this one is also considerations while doing quantitative research. Okay, so you have to remember to be objective. Okay, when you conceptualize the research question, so you have to, and this applies also when doing qualitative study as well, because you, as a researcher, okay, you don't want to be biased even at the very beginning. So you have to be very objective. One thing I can highlight this is, when you do research, you have in your head, okay, I have to find results like this. So, my research is successful. So that's not true, not how you go about research. So you have to be very objective at the beginning. Okay, you develop your hypothesis. You have certain, reasons why you think A is related to B. Okay, you have that background already, but you cannot, while you're doing your research, you change some data or something like that. So it will relate to ethics as well. So that's not a good way to go about it. Okay, just hope that you keep that in mind, right? And also type of design chosen, of course, accuracy, feasibility, control, and lastly, validity. Okay, what does all this means? So we'll go very quickly on this, especially on the validity. So when we say, is that research feasible to be done, right? So you have to look at the time. How long do you have to finish your study? So you have to think about that while incorporating that into your design. And then you look at your subjects or your samples. Do you have your samples? If you're doing surveys, do you know exactly who is your participants, and your respondents? How are you going to get them? Are the equipment and facility available? Okay, you have to also think about that. the expenses. So usually at your level, you don't really think much about the expense because your supervisor is going to do that for you. But of course, while you're designing your study, it would be good as well to think about that, right? And experience and ethics, yes, you, if possible, you have to have some experience. Experience here doesn't mean that you have done the research before. It also means when you do your literature review, you already have an idea, okay, or some background about the topic. So you know a little bit about what you're doing. So you about things blindly. Okay, that's very important. So especially true now in the COVID-19, era, I would say, because there's very limited limitation in terms of facilities. So if you to do something where you have to be somewhere, that might limit you. Okay, and because you are in the planning stage, you have to think ahead basically. So what if COVID is still ongoing while you're doing your research? So you will be limited in terms of access to certain places. Okay, so if you're doing survey, for example, you might be able to just use internet. So you use WhatsApp, you use emails, rather than you go house to house for making the survey. Okay, you have to think about that. So internal and external validity. Okay, so remember a few weeks ago, I think someone asked about qualitative study. Why people say it's not as good as quantitative study. Okay, remember? So basically, in quantitative study, you have a way to ensure that your experiment or your research is valid. Okay, so they have this internal and external validity. Okay, when you say internal, it's basically on the research itself. Okay, so you have your independent variable, you have your dependent variable. So are you sure that the independent variable, so the thing that you change, you manipulated, is the only thing that affects the dependent variable? Okay, and through quantitative study, you can actually quantify this. Whereas if you're doing qualitative study, because you don't have the numbers, you have the qualitative data in terms of words, so it's not, you cannot give numbers basically to how valid it is, the relationship between the two. Okay, and external validity is when you have your experiments or your study where you have your control. Okay, so control is actually for external validity because you want to generalize your findings. Sorry. So you can actually compare the two. Okay, from your so you can compare. So in your control study, you have certain results, and in your experimental study, you have certain results. So you can actually compare the two and say, okay, this is valid, my results is valid because see, the control result says this. So if you don't do any intervention or any programs, the people in the control study doesn't show any changes, in terms of behavior or something. So this is really abstract. So it really depends on back on your own research study. Okay, so I'm basically generalizing a bit. But the key point here is the validity. Okay, how you will be able to do that. Right. So for this one, for study design, for those who still is a bit unsure about, your own study design. Okay, look at this one. So is there an intervention or a treatment? Okay, so in your study, your very own study, look back, okay, and think, are you introducing something? Okay, are you developing a program, or are you giving, if you're doing experiments, for example, are you testing something? Okay, are you checking something? So if there is, then you look at the yes there. And is there control, randomization, and manipulation? Okay, if there's 3 of that, then you're doing experimental study. Okay, but if not, you're still having the program, you're still having the experimental study, but you don't have control, or you don't manipulate something, or you don't randomize things. So that falls under quasi-experimental. Okay, it's still some sort of experimental study, but quasi here, it means that it's almost experimental, but not truly, because or something. Okay, we'll see that a bit later. And then go to the no part here. So if there's no intervention, there's no treatment, okay, you're not doing any sort of experiments to fishes, for example, if you're doing something on fish, or if you're doing something on, deforestation, are you going to introduce a program to the area? If not, then think about what is the primary purpose. Okay, are you just going to describe the situation, or do you want to try to explain relationship? Okay, from the titles that you guys have, I see a lot of people are doing, on some sort of situation, okay, and the causes and the solutions. So that would fall either to describe or to explain relationships, okay, and that you see for descriptions, then you'll do some descriptive research, or if you try to explain some relationship, then you're doing correlational study. So each one of these has its own way to analyze. Okay, I hope you bear that in mind. So for experimental and quasi-experimental, there's always going to be statistics. Okay, you always have to go. So usually people use SPSS. Okay, but even for descriptive and correlational study, there are ways where you can use statistics to explain your research. Okay, so you can get some information, and I think that's where a lot of you guys are going to with mixed methods, because you're trying to get some data, and then you try to analyze that using quantitative study, for example, to get some figures or some numbers to represent the issue. Okay, and that's fine, that's okay. It totally depends on you guys what you want to do. Okay, now so we'll go quickly on the non-experimental design. Okay, so if you notice just now, the descriptive and correlational, they are non-experimental design. Okay, but are they qualitative or are they quantitative? It depends on your instruments. Okay, how you are measuring, how you are collecting data, and how you analyze them. Okay, and that really determines whether it's quantitative or qualitative. So for descriptive, remember just now for descriptive, if you just want to describe a situation, okay, and you have only one group, okay, so let's say you are going to Shah Alam to look at their food waste, okay, their behavior towards food waste. So if you only have one group, so only people in Shah Alam, so it will be a descriptive design. Okay, look at that one group. Yes, descriptive design. So how you are going to explain that? You can use descriptive statistics. So you have your means, you have your histograms, you have percentages. You can use that to explain the results. Okay, but if you have more than one group, you have 2, 3. Maybe you have in Shah Alam, you have in Klang, for example. Okay, so you want, actually in your study, you want to compare the behavior between these two areas. Or if you go more, maybe you want to compare people in urban and people in rural areas, how their habits towards certain issues. Okay, you can do comparative descriptive, And the way to compare that is you use t-test. Okay, so remember this is descriptive. Okay, because descriptive, you just want to describe something. You don't, you are not trying to correlate or explain a relationship. Okay, but if you want to do something like that, it's going to be a correlational research. Okay, and correlational, it can be into two. Okay, so you want to describe relationship between two variables. Okay, or you want to predict the relationship between or among variables. Okay, so what does this mean? So for description is something that is current. So let's say you are doing some sort of survey and you want to try to you know, connect. So why people are very hard to dispose of their waste. Okay, one of it, in your opinion, one of it is the problem with waste management in that area. Okay, and you want to try to describe that relationship currently. So that is descriptive correlational design. But for example, if you want to predict something, a relationship that is in the future. Okay, so let's say the government has introduced one act, one environmental act that, you know, somehow forces people to segregate their waste. Okay, and you want to see what the effect of that law towards the uh, behavior of the people. Okay, so that becomes predictive correlational design. Okay, and the statistical way of checking that is you can use correlation statistics, or you can use multiple regression. Okay, so I'm including the name of the statistics there because, you know, it's going to be easier for you to learn about it. Because in this course we cannot cover everything, because there's a lot of people who are doing different type of things. Okay, so we really need to look at the time that we have. Right, so I hope you guys can look at that and think about your own study, right? And remember, this is for non-experimental design. But okay, if you have experimental or quasi-experimental, we'll look at that afterwards in a few moments. So this is just a table, okay? I just want to share with you guys. The reference are there if you want to search for it. So basically, I just want to highlight causal comparative research. So that is the comparative research just now. And then you have your correlational and you have your experimental research, just to help you to identify where your study is. Okay, if you still have some problems with that. Okay, now we go to what we should be learning today. So experimental and quasi-experimental designs. Okay, so in this type of designs, it requires that the researcher intervenes, okay, to bring about the desired effect. So imagine that you are the one who are doing something, okay. So in this type of experiments or this type of studies, you can test cause and effect relationships. Okay, so I told you just now, I've taken a look at what you guys answered, and a lot of people mention cause and effect relationships. Okay, so for your information, just want to highlight again, in quantitative studies, you can test for cause and effect relationships. But in qualitative, so it used to be people say no, okay? Because in qualitative study, you just can express, you know, what are certain causes. You go very deep into that, like how is the people behavior or habit reflects on their, you know, what they are doing or their culture. But I think in the past few years, people are starting to accept qualitative study to test cause and effect relationships. But I have to highlight here again, this is still a very new perspective, okay? There's a lot of people who still cannot accept qualitative study to test cause and effect, okay? So bear that in mind, right? So in cause and effect relationships, why people say qualitative cannot? Because okay, first the causal, the independent and dependent variables must be associated with each other. Okay, so in quantitative research, that is easy to do because you already identify your independent and dependent variables. Whereas in qualitative, usually you don't even know what is your independent variable. Okay, so for example, if you want to look at what is the cause of some behavior, okay, a lot of people I think are doing this. You want to study, or you want to do some surveys, you want to do some interviews on the population, and you try to find the cause, okay, towards certain issues. So it can be anything. It can be waste segregation, it can be waste disposal, it can be deforestation, open burning, a lot of things. So if you are starting out from zero, okay, so you just want to find out what are the possible causes, and you go and interview people. Okay, so you don't actually know what is the actual causes. Okay, so that is why number one is very hard for qualitative study to do, whereas in quantitative it's already there. And then the cause must precede the effect. Also, this is it may sound simple. Of course, things happen for a reason. Okay, people always say that, but what it really means is you really have to know already there's some relationship between the two. Okay, that's why you proceed with quantitative study. And lastly, the relationship must not be explainable by another variable. Okay, so this is a very important characteristics for quantitative study. And experimental and quasi-experimental, of course, they are quantitative study. So there are ways for you to mitigate some you remember last week we learned about extraneous variables, okay, and control groups. So that's where this is very, useful to know. So in true experimental design, okay, there's three properties. And this three is the core things basically in experimental. So it has randomization, it has control, it has manipulation. Okay, remember just now the figure that I shared. Okay, so these three must be present before you can say that it's true experimental design. If one of them is missing, then it becomes quasi. Okay, I hope that is clear. So what is randomization? Okay, when people say randomization in experimental studies, it means random assignment. Okay, so it might be a little bit confusing with random sampling. Okay, so in random sampling, you randomly select individuals or your samples from the population, okay, to participate in the study. So it is typically done to help ensure the representativeness of the sample. So what does that mean is, anyone in the population can be chosen, has the probability to be chosen as your participants. Okay, so this is much easily seen if you're doing surveys. Okay, because you have your survey, you have your population. Okay, remember to make your research, you have to be able to ensure that your findings can represent, the population that you chose. So if we link that to the Shah Alam example just now, so anyone in Shah Alam is can be your participants. So that is random sampling. So it's very randomly, the samples are random. So you don't actually, you don't have bias. You don't just choose, okay, I'm living in Shah Alam and I only want to choose my neighbors. Okay, that's not random sampling. Okay. For random assignment, so you already have your random samples and then you want to assign the participants or the samples into groups. Remember, you have your experimental and you have your control groups. Okay, so you randomly assign them to any of this group, and only then can it be called it is random assignment. Okay, so why is this important? It sounds like a lot of work. Okay, you guys, in doing research, we don't want to just do things because they are easy. No, we want to do something. Okay, imagine when you're trying to, okay, the result of my study is littering is caused by the availability of garbage bins somewhere. Okay, and when people say, okay, how are you sure? Okay, then I would say I have this statistical data, okay, to collaborate my findings. And people would say, oh, okay, so you have the data already, that's good. But then if you want to say this represents the whole of Malaysia, okay, imagine if you want to represent the population of Malaysia, your participants must come all over Malaysia. Okay, you cannot just simply say, okay, I'm testing my neighbors and I want to, say that, okay, generalize the findings to the whole of Malaysia. That's not true. Okay, you have to think logically as well. Is that if you're staying in urban areas, for example, how can you generalize that to the rural areas? Okay, and that's one thing. There's a lot of different factors. Yeah, that's why randomization is very, very important. Okay, you want to make sure that your findings are valid. Yes, there's a lot of work. That's why research is quite hard. But you have to remember that you are trying to do something that benefits people. Okay, not just okay, I want to do this just because I want to grad. Okay, that's true. People always want to graduate, of course, but to make it even richer, you have to think about the effects you have as an individual to your community. For example, how good it is. Someone approached me yesterday asking about a problem that are faced in his or her hometown, right? And you can actually do something about it, right? So I hope you guys can find some motivation on doing your research, not just for your own benefit, but for others as well. Okay. So next is very quickly on control. So of course, this is basically on the how you want to eliminate the extraneous variables, the effects of that into your research. So you have your control. Okay. So for example, just giving, if you're doing some treatment, okay, but this is usually for those in the medical, medical area. So I'm sure you've heard about placebo. Okay, so usually people are given some experimental things. So linking that to the current issue right now, the COVID-19 vaccine, for example, when they say they are doing the testing, okay, there's always going to be something like this. They have their experimental sample and they have their control sample. So for the experimental one, they will give the vaccine. Okay, but for the control group, they won't receive the vaccine. And after a period of time, they will look at, okay, are these people, after they take the vaccine, how is their improvement, their health, okay? And they will compare that to the control group. So you can actually eliminate, okay, maybe it's because of something else. It's not because of the vaccine. That's the purpose of having the control group. Okay, and another thing is if you're doing interventions or programs, okay, the control groups are the people who are not involved in that program or intervention. Okay, hope that that makes sense. Next, the third one is manipulation. So you have to be doing something to the subject. Okay, not physically doing something, not always the case, but you know, if you link that to programs or experiments, you're doing something actively. Okay, you are implementing something. So that's why it falls under experimental or quasi-experimental. Otherwise, if you're not doing something and you're just looking at the effects of current programs, for example, that will go to non-experimental. Okay, and the statistics are there, so you still can do that. Okay, so I'm not going to say, okay, everyone, just do experimental. No, that's not how to go about it, because a lot of topics, it depends on what you actually want to look for. Okay, if you're looking for cause and effect, then definitely you have to go for experimental or quasi-experimental. But otherwise, if you just want to identify causes or you want to look at effects or something, then you can always do non-experimental and qualitative design as well. Right. Okay. So just to have a very clear idea of the three things, okay, so this is randomized experimental design. Okay, this is the most basic or the most familiar design that is involved in experimental design. So it's randomized experimental design. Even in that, you can see the keywords. Okay, so of course you're gonna have your samples and your control group. Look at the first figure, the above one. You have some sort of intervention or some sort of program. Okay, so for the experimental group, they will undergo the program, but for the control group, they won't. Okay, so if the yellow one is the desired behavior change, for example, so you can see immediately how many people are affected by that program. Okay, and you can eliminate the extraneous variables, because you see in control, out of the 8 people, 1 people change. Okay, so you can actually minus that from the intervention people. Okay, that's a very general way of looking at it. Of course, in any sort of designs, you're not going to have only 8 people in one group. Okay, that's very because you won't be able to generalize your findings. There are, of course, there are some situations where this happens, and usually this is for very, very specialized issues. For example, related to medicine, okay? So for people who have very rare diseases or something, so you have a limited number there. So there must be a reason why you chose such small numbers. But otherwise, generally, you're going to have a sample size that represent the population that you're targeting, right? So in this situation, you have two groups, so you can do the statistical comparisons, okay? Because you can actually determine the differences between the groups, right? So remember when I say just minus 1 people, so that's a very simple way of looking at it. There's actually a systematical way of doing it using statistics, okay? Please bear that in mind. Right, sample size is important, of course. Too large will waste your time, definitely, and resources and money. Okay, remember, while doing research, you always want to minimize all this while generating enough data, valid data, for example. Okay, but otherwise, if you have too small, you may lead to inaccurate results. Okay, so the next example there, I just put that in. So, for example, because first one is for people, second one is what if you're trying to test something towards animals, for example. In this case, it's fish. Okay, you want to look at how the shrimp affects the parasites in fishes. Okay, so you have your treatment group, you have a control group, and you can compare. So basically, the basics are there. It's very similar. Whatever samples you're using, can be people, it can be programs, it can be experiments. Okay, just look at it in general way and you'll be fine. Okay, sample size. Okay, remember just now we say about sample size. If sample size is too small, differences may not be detected. Okay, resulting in type 2 error. So what is type 1, type 2 error? Okay, remember back very early in this course when I tell you about hypothesis. So actually for hypothesis, you have your null hypothesis, which is H naught or HO. And you actually have your alternative hypothesis, which is H1. Okay. So if you try to be easier, you can look at the this example. So effect of biofertilizer on plant growth. Okay, very simple. I hope it's a very simple example. So the null hypothesis is the fertilizer doesn't do anything to the plant growth. And your alternative hypothesis is applying the fertilizer will increase the plant growth. Okay, but if you have very small samples, it may happen. Okay, if you look at the last figure at the below, your reality is actually positive. Okay, so there is actually an effect of the fertilizer towards plant growth. But if you have very small sample design, you might find from your findings that the answer is actually negative. So from your finding, it says no, there's no particular effect. Okay, and that may happen because your sample size is very small. So let's say you just have 2 plants. Okay, and somehow those 2 plants, when you give the fertilizer, both doesn't grow much faster. Okay, but for example, if you have 200 plants, okay, and 198 plants actually shows the growth, okay, and only the 2 doesn't, and somehow probabilistic, quite not possible, but sometimes it may happen because of random. So the 2 that you chose are the 2 that doesn't grow. Okay, so you will get the false negative. Okay, just giving you the example there so you can think more about it. So the next question is, okay, doctor, how do we determine the right sample number? Okay, so this is actually related to something called power analysis, right? I've attached a link here. You can actually watch this afterwards. It's a very good video I found that explains the power analysis, and they gave a lot of examples, very simple examples that you can actually relate to. Okay, because this is talking about statistics, but just I don't want to scare you guys. It's not gonna be complicated. It's very simple. Okay, power analysis. So for people who are doing surveys, okay, bear in mind you guys will need to do power analysis as well to determine your sample size. Okay, remember why? Because you want to have enough samples, enough participants to be able to, conclude your findings, right? You don't want to have a very small size. Okay. Right. So remember just now we have the experimental randomized randomized experimental design. So there are other types of group designs as well. So one of them is Solomon 4 group design, where you have 2 control groups and 2 experimental group. Okay, why is this? Because so first you do your random assignment of your respondents or your participants or your samples into 4 groups. Okay, and you do your pre-test with the control group 1 and experimental group 1. So this pre-test, it people might say, okay, doctor, I'm doing survey, I'm not interested in all of this. Okay, guys, how you do your pre-test? Okay, remember, experimental and quasi-experimental, it doesn't always means you are doing experiments in the lab. Okay, if you're doing an intervention or you're doing a program, that's also something that you can do as well. And how do you want to, okay, for example, if you want to establish a 3R program, okay, I'm taking last week's example. Okay, you want to do a 3R program in your district, for example. Okay, so before doing that program, you will gather some information. So that is your pre-test. How you are doing that? If you're doing surveys, that can be your pre-test. Okay, you're doing surveys, you just want to ask, you just want to gather the data about the respondents. Okay, so you're doing your pre-test. But why in Solomon 4 group, they have 2 experimental and control group? Okay, this is basically because some people highlighted, if you're doing pre-test before some sort of intervention, you might cause some bias. Okay, so let's say before the program, you ask people, okay, what do you think about 3R? Okay, and in that way, they already know about 3R. Okay, whereas before they don't know anything. So that will introduce bias into your design. That's why they have these 2 experimental group and control groups. So in the next 2, they don't do any pretest. And in the experimental group, they just directly undergo the intervention. Okay. And the last control group, they don't do anything except for the post-test. So imagine if you're doing 2 times survey, okay, you do it before and then you do your program, you do it after. Okay, so this is something that possible that you can do if you want to do something like this in your research. And of course, there's another one where they say it's after only design. Okay, so after only is very easy to determine as well. So they don't have any post-test. Okay. Sorry, they don't have any pre-test. So is this doable? Okay, it has its own considerations, its own characteristics. So in particular with this design, you can say that the random assignment that you do, okay, the respondents are very, very similar. They are very similar. There's nothing that's going to cause any extraneous variables. Okay, and then after they undergo the intervention, you do your post-test. So this is, for example, you do some engagement. For example, you do a town hall session. People always do this. And then in the end, they have the surveys. Okay, please rate the things, right? So this is some sort of after-only design. Of course, it's quite less reliable compared to the previous one. Okay, but it still can be done if you can prove that your respondents or your participants or your samples are similar in experimental and control group, right? Okay, then we go to quasi-experimental design. Okay, so for quasi, it also tests cause and effect, no problem, but they don't do randomization, okay, or they don't have control group. Remember the 3 things, 3 characteristics. Okay, they don't have one of that, then they falls under quasi-experimental, right? So the lack of control, it makes the evidence less convincing but it still can be used to test the cause and effect relationship. Okay. So one of the types of quasi-experimental design. So they have experimental and control group. They have the two groups, but they don't do any randomization. Okay. So this is very easily to think about if, okay, you look at school children, for example, if you already choose one school to do a program, okay, maybe you want to introduce an environmental management program in the school next to your house, maybe, for example. Okay, you cannot randomize already the students because you have a very specific group pool of students. Okay, and maybe in the whole school there's only 30 people. Very unlikely, but just bear with me. So only 30 people, so you have no choice, you have to use every one of them, so you cannot randomize already the sampling. Okay, so it has threats to internal validity, yes, because you cannot randomize it. But the results are still very strong because you are able, because remember you have your control group, so you can compare that, okay, one with the other. That's why it's very, this is why experimental and quasi-experimental is more advantageous compared to other non-experimental studies because you have your control group. Okay. And also in quasi, they have after only non-equivalent control group design. So it's very similar to the one before. It's only because they don't fulfill all three. It's not randomized, or they don't have control, or they don't manipulate something. So you have to look at that. The confidence in the findings depends on the integrity of the assumption that the two groups are comparable. Okay, because they don't do any randomization, right? So after only non-equivalent control group design, it's also possible. Okay. And there's also one group pre-test post-test design. So this is only one group. They don't have a control group, only the experimental group. And it's used only one group is available for study. Okay, and you have your pre-test and you have your post-test. They don't have any control group, no randomization. So this is actually the weakest quasi-experimental design, but it might be the only option you have. Okay, so remember the school just now, before there was 30, but then this year maybe there's only 20 people. Okay, and you cannot do, after doing your power analysis, it says that the minimum number is 20 people. So you definitely have to choose everyone, and you cannot divide them into two groups. Okay, so this is very depending on the situation of the study. Okay, right. So lastly is a time series design. Okay, and this is when we are 2 weeks ago, I had shared something about this. When you do a study over a period of time and you actively collect the data. Okay, so if it's a 1 year project, so every 3 months you go and interview the people or you do the survey, and that is some sort of time series design. Okay, but in experimental and quasi-experimental, this is possible, um, but you have your intervention. You are actively doing something. Okay. So, testing, maturation, and selection are all potential threats. Okay, maturation, I just want to add, what it means is, like I said before, when they do the test, especially if, okay, for example, you're doing the survey, right? So the question in each survey is similar. Okay, when they do it the first time, they will do it, okay, they will do it very seriously, But the second time, they got the same question. Okay, after 3 months, same question. Okay, they will try do that. Okay, but you can see, you know, they are already mature in a way because they already know what is going to be asked. Okay, and you can imagine when eventually they do the last time, it might be even they don't even read anymore. They just okay, I remember last time I do this. Okay, so that's the threat to this sort of design, because remember the experimental group, it must be the same group of people. Okay, you're not going to do this with different people. So that's the threat there. But sometimes this is something that has to be done. So very general example would be census. Okay, banci penduduk. So census data, you do that every year, for example, or every 5 years, and people already know what sort of questions they are going to ask. Okay, and it's very automatic, but it has to be done. Okay. So strengths and weaknesses of quasi-experimental designs. Okay, the advantage, it's practical, it's less expensive. Okay, because you remember you don't have to, there's one thing missing. So maybe you don't have the control group, for example. So the number of resources that you need are less compared to experimental design. Okay. But actually, you can improve the, you know, the strength of the study by having replication. Okay, when people say you're only doing quasi-experimental, that's not that strong, but you can counter by saying, okay, you can replicate this and you'll get a similar answer. Okay? And that's where it's strong, because it's repeatable. Okay? Secondly, the disadvantage. Okay, the disadvantage is because unable to demonstrate clear cause and effect relationship. So it's not that it cannot, but it doesn't achieve the level that experimental studies have. Okay, right. So for this is just one slide, don't worry. So this is non-experimental design. Okay, so just now we were talking about experimental and quasi-experimental, okay? But in non-experimental design, the independent variable is not manipulated. That's the biggest highlight there, okay? So think back at your own design. If you're not doing an active thing, you're not implementing a program, you're not treating something, so you will most likely fall into non-experimental design. Okay, but it doesn't mean that this is qualitative. Yeah, okay, I have to highlight this because a lot of people are having this misconception. So the only difference is the independent variable is not manipulated. Okay, so people who are trying to identify causes or something, causes of an issue, trying to link behaviors to an issue, you guys might fall under this non-experimental design. So there is, it's not randomized, okay, subjects, and there is no control groups. Okay, survey, it is non-experimental design, but it can be quantitative. Okay, remember, it totally depends on your study design. So try to think about the future. You know, right now you have your own research aim, what you want to achieve in your study. Okay, now next, think about what's next. Okay, how you're going to achieve that. And I don't want you to limit yourself into just thinking, okay, I'm doing survey and this is qualitative study. No. Okay, it depends on what sort of data you find out in the end. And if you are able to do quantitative survey, that will be very beneficial because you can actually generalize that findings to the population, and that much appreciated in terms of, you know, your own benefit, or your own contributions towards the community or the country, for example. Okay, don't just think that you're doing something, I'm doing something very small. No one is gonna, benefit from this. No, because everything you do, okay, it gives information to the body, the current body of knowledge. Okay, it might not be something that can be currently seen. Okay, it might, you can see the effect 5 years afterwards. Okay, so try to think about the future. Okay, in surveys, it may be descriptive, it can be exploratory, and it can be comparative surveys. Okay, so for comparative surveys and descriptive, you can look back at the previous slide about the statistics that can be done to do this. Okay, provided that you have quantitative data. If you have qualitative data, for people who are doing mixed methods, okay, so usually what the way to go about mixed methods is it can be two ways. So it can be that you are doing qualitative first, in which you try to find the words or the causes to an issue or a problem. Okay, so very simple. If you're trying to find causes to, let me just pick deforestation. Okay, so you're trying to find causes to deforestation, and you're going to interview, or you're going to do some surveys on people who are directly involved in deforestation. So people who in villages, people who are is involved in the timber business. Okay, you go about this in a qualitative way, okay, and you gather the data. Okay, so from there you might get 10 courses, okay, and then you do your quantitative study. Okay, so this will be two ways. Okay, so when you get the qualitative data, you do your quantitative study, in which you try to quantify the findings from the first one. Okay, you have your courses, and then you do another survey. For example, you want to quantify, okay, maybe one, what are the causes? So maybe you want to look at the effect of, you know, economical benefits. Okay, people who are involved in the timber business, they have these economical benefits. Okay, you want to look at that. So you will eventually, after you doing the survey, you will get the quantitative data. You get the numbers of people who are doing this because of just economic benefits. Okay, and you can analyze that, and finally you get the answer. Okay, that's highly probable that yes, economic benefit is the most important factor in deforestation. So I'm just throwing this out there as an example. Okay. Another way is something that is totally opposite. You're doing quantitative study first, so you get the numbers, and then you look at it in a qualitative way. Okay, so maybe through your readings, through your literature review, you already have 5 major causes to deforestation. Okay, now from the 5, you want to check, okay, which one is actually, the most important thing. Okay, so you do your quantitative study, you do the survey to the same people, okay, and you get one, okay, just now the economic benefits. Then you want to do a qualitative study because you want to explain why, okay, why people of this population choose economic benefits as the major reason. So, the word why is the keyword there, because you will go about it with interviews, or maybe you have focus group session, okay, and you interview these people. Okay, Pak Cik, uncle, why did you say that this the economic benefits, the money is the reason why you do deforestation. And they will say, oh, when I grow up, blah, 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 blah. My family is in the timber business or something. So, you know, you got that information. So that is one people. So imagine you have 20 individuals and saying things. Okay, so you got all this information in qualitative data, and you can make some generalization about that. Okay, so it's how you go about it. I hope it's a very simple, you know, sort of examples, but I'm trying to relate that very general so everyone can appreciate where you guys are, okay, what sort of study you are doing, and later on what sort of your methodology, and bearing in mind the requirements of each study, okay, in order to make it reliable, in order to make it valid, okay, and also how significant it is. Okay. Right. So this is very quickly, I shared the Mentimeter results. So that's what I saw. So 19 people are doing mixed methods. So I hope you bear in mind what I said just now. When you are writing up your methodology, okay, and that comes after the literature review. Okay, when you're doing your methodology, you have to think, okay, what when you say mixed methods research, what part is actually the quantitative and what part is the qualitative, and how exactly you want to do that, what sort of data analysis, what sort of data collection methods you're using, okay. And of course with quantitative and qualitative people, okay, 15 people are doing qualitative and 13 on quantitative. Okay, so I hope you guys have enough idea right now. Of course, if you still have any sort of problem, still thinking about, not sure what your study falls under, don't hesitate to contact me. Okay, so I'm opening the forum after this for you guys to, you know, throw out your questions, or if you have any suggestions or you want to share any resources. Okay, the forum will be open after class, so I hope you guys can make use of it. So I don't know, last week what I wanted to try was doing the forum, because usually when you do forum, you start off with something and then it continues on. But what happened last week was people was sharing their own thing. Okay, it's fine, it's okay, but the thing is I cannot catch up to all of you because there's 40 plus of you guys, so I cannot answer everyone's yet, but I will do so eventually. But the thing is, with forum, what I wanted to do is having some sort of interactive sessions where, you know, rather than having this in class, you know, in face-to-face, we do this in forum. So people, you can type your question and, you know, I can answer. Of if anybody else has the answer, you guys can, you know, come in and answer as well. So I want to get conversations going, okay, because in research design, or rather research methodology, you know, you cannot there's a lot of things. Basically there's a lot of things happening at different stages, and it would be useful if you guys can talk to each other, okay, and, you know, try and find some comparisons, or you can share your own problems. Of course I will be there to answer as well. Okay, I'm not I'm okay with you guys approaching me on WhatsApp or anything, okay, and it's fine. But the thing is, sometimes the questions are the same, okay. So sometimes I get like 10 WhatsApps asking the same things, okay. And wouldn't it be better if it's in forum and everyone can read that, you know, and you get some insight into it, yeah. So I don't want to create in this class, okay, I don't want it to be competitive. We're not competing with each other, okay. You guys have your own research and you will proceed with what you have already designed or studied, okay. And I hope you have looked into the resources that I shared on literature review. So that is in, I think I did share in Putra Belas. Okay, there's that app called Wakelet. So it's actually where I put in, some interesting things I found. So I hope you guys can get some ideas on literature review from that resources as well. Okay. Okay, so this is just references from my previous slides. So actually we are finished for today and it's 11:09. Okay, it's good. It's 1 hour. So do you guys have any questions or something that you want to share maybe? Okay, semua okay lah tu. Right, will you be okay with, so this afternoon, okay, we won't have the physical class as well, but I'll be around for the forum. Okay, if anyone wants to ask anything, I will also start to share something in the forum as well. So have a look at your literature review. If you haven't done it, you can start, working on that. Okay. My suggestion would be you can either do outlines. Okay. So you do the subtopics first before doing the, all the write-ups. You have the topics and you can see the, the links and the significance of the topic towards your main major topic. Okay. Second suggestion is look at your topic, look at the keywords. So basically the keywords are the easiest things that you can identify first and you must include in your literature review. Okay. Thirdly is it might be useful to do mind maps, okay, while you're doing literature review. Okay. I'm not sure if you guys have ever done mind maps before, but it's very, very useful, okay, especially if you're just starting out and you want to look at the different factors that may affect, whatever you're looking at, what are, basically it helps you in brainstorming. You gave out the ideas. Okay. So I hope you guys find this lecture beneficial. Okay. I hope it helps you while designing your research study. Okay. And I'm looking forward to reading your literature review. Yeah, please bear in mind, include the key points, include the various things that have to be there. Okay.